Hey everyone, it's Dr. Rick, founder of Herbal 411, and today's unboxing is on plant-based meat. So this is one of my favorite because I love, I've had Impossible Burger, I've had Beyond Burger, I've had other meat substitutes that were out there a long time ago, not so great. But these other ones, these newer companies, they actually are very tasty. I love the hot Italian sausage here. Now, I happened to be shopping and I found this sticker, so I said, oh, I'm going to get that. And it's not expired, but you know, when you're a shopper in the grocery store and you see this, it sometimes attracts you to consider buying it at cheap prices. But then the other part of me says, well, wait a minute, why is it reduced? Nobody's buying it. It must be old. You can't sell old food. There's an expiration date. So these were not expired. But what I wanted to do is talk about plant-based meat substitutes. And I do believe when these things first came out about 2013, so 10 years ago or so, that's when I went vegan. As I mentioned in my previous videos, for about 3 years. And I was doing it more to defend the plant-based community, or my patients that were plant-based, because online, Twitter especially, there are a lot of low-carb people and carnivore people that were starting to get some traction with their practice, and they were beating up on plant-based folks, especially athletes. And you've probably seen some Netflix documentaries on plant-based athletes versus animal-based, and then there's the old ones with the China study. You know, there's always going to be a war between two. Since the tobacco industry did a really good strategy of confusing the general public on what's actually healthy, you're also confusing doctors who don't research or study continuously. And when the docs are divided as far as what's the healthiest kind of lifestyle, then the general public's going to definitely be divided. So you can actually find studies at NIH, PubMed, or Google Scholar to support your thesis, whether the practice is going to be meat-based or plant-based, the low-fat versus low-carb. That's what it boils down to if you think about it. And I think that both practices can be healthy. But just the fact that you're practicing restriction of some sort or awareness, conscious efforts to stay healthy, usually you're going to cut out two things. That's going to be cutting out sugar, accessory sugar or added sugar, and then cutting out highly processed grains. Those two things we take too much of as far as Americans. And you know, my son is studying in Rome, and I remember going to Rome the first time that we went as a vacation for the family, and I remember seeing that people that would eat would take so long to eat. We would sit down in a mom and pop restaurant in Italy, and we would be done in like 15 minutes. As soon as the food came, we'd eat it up. And then we'd kind of just be waiting around. When you'll watch the locals, they would take their time, go outside, take a smoke break, come back in, have the next course. There's always laughing and a little bit of loudness, but not to the point of disgusting like what we see in America, where you hear F-bombs all the time. But it was just unusual. So you had slower eaters. You had slower eaters that were smoking, not all of them, but some. And then you had slower eaters that were smoking, and then afterward having espresso to top off the night. And I'm thinking, holy mackerel, that's really... Anyway, the bottom line, their lifestyles are technically unhealthy compared to ours, but yet they live longer than we do. We have more heart disease than they do. I think it comes down to the practice, the lifestyle. And I will always try to guide my patients with first steps. And that's why I wanted to talk about these things. I don't suggest always having this. I think if you can get into a plant-based kind of lifestyle, especially if you have prostate cancer in situ or you have narrowing of the coronary arteries, the data from before shows that Dean Ornish's vegan, low-fat diet did make a difference as far as opening up the narrowing of the artery or the stenosis and reversing heart disease, and also reversing prostate cancer in situ. That's early prostate cancer. The same practice in Ornish's intensive lifestyle reversal program. But we were also having more data come out recently, especially with the Feldman crowd-funded study, which is gaining some traction on the low-carb community actually having good results with regards to not going into a heart attack. Now, The low-carb community has been around for a while, mostly for seizures and other things, weight loss, diabetes, which I think it's very powerful, but the data has to be out there, and it's starting to evolve because crowdfunding and or citizen scientists, as they call themselves, they want to see information. I think the information from before cannot be ignored. It's more population-based, sometimes anecdotal, but it cannot be ignored. I think there's the low-carb community always will bastardize all the studies because they were studies that were done with questionnaires, so they're not reliable. But listen, I think overall it just comes down to figuring out what your lifestyle is, where you're going as far as your disease process, and implementing a change. So I believe that people can stay in the plant-based low-fat community, or people can stay in the low-carb, low-crap community. Now, you can't kind of do low-carb in the morning and plant-based at night and then throw in intermittent fasting. You really have to pick a line and stick to it. And how long do you have to stick to it? At least 8 weeks. There was a study that was released by Chris Gardner, my favorite scientist out of Stanford. And it was a small study, 38 plus people, called Swap Meat. And Swap Meat did study the use of Beyond Burger compared to a fairly reasonable meat supplier. So they essentially had the study subjects start with either half of them, I think it was 18, were going to do the plant substitutes, and the other 18 would do just meat. And the cool thing was, and Stanford always does this, they really try to control the variables so that the results of the study can be generalizable. At a certain point in time, they switched. The participants and the meat users would go to plant-based, and the plant-based users would go to meat-based, keeping all variables about the same. Protein count, calories, volume. I don't know if they counted for exercise, but I think he did another study off of that with college-level athletes too. I'll have to get more into that, but the idea is that if you can get people to kind of practice both over the course of 8 weeks and then measure their LDL, it was actually LDL-C, or calculated LDL, watch their blood pressures, watch TMAO, which is trimethylamine oxidase. It's a byproduct of, theoretically, the things that the microbiome makes dependent on your food. And the plant-based community has always been bastardizing the meat-based community, saying, hey, listen, if you eat too much meat, you're going to make too much TMAO, because meat going to the bacteria in your gut will produce TMAO. TMAO is supposedly this big trigger for inflammation, meaning arthritis, degenerative neurovascular diseases, and then heart attack. The outcome of the study, bottom line, is that the folks who chose to do plant-based meat substitutes actually had a statistically significant, now it's a small study group, but there was statistical significance with the weight loss, number one, and it was marginal over 8 weeks. I think it was like 2 to 4 pounds, I believe, or 1 to 2 kilos. And you would think, it's not that much, but you try losing and holding 2 pounds to 4 pounds off in 8 weeks. How many people have tried that and they always gain it back? And now it's going to be February. I'm sure everybody's quit their New Year's resolutions. Anyway, so the benefits that were found that were statistically significant, that means a p-value of less than 0.05 for you nerds, was, number one, weight loss. There was a difference when the plant-based users were on the arm, where they used a dose of 2 servings of this plant substitute per day for 8 weeks. So weight loss was significantly different than the meat-based users of the same volume and all the other variables controlled. The TMAO was less in the plant-based users. Well, the ones that were going with plant as their substitute, 2 servings per day, had less TMAO, had more weight loss. And then finally, LDL-C, meaning LDL calculated cholesterol, which has always been the bad guy. If you have too much meat, your LDL will go up. Well, the plant-based substitutes had lower LDL-C, and it was statistically significant. Again, the population size that they studied was small, 30 plus, I think it was 36 people, 18 and 18, and they switched over midway through. But that's statistically significant. Some of you will argue, well, it wasn't long enough, but in my anecdotal study with my patients, you can see changes with hemoglobin A1C or cholesterol by implementing like red yeast rice or berberine with high cholesterol or insulin-resistant patients. So I think 4 weeks to 8 weeks is a good enough amount of time. The question is, can we apply that to the general population? Should everybody try it? And the only reason I bring this up is because when I started on my quest way back when to become plant-based, well, I didn't really do low-fat, I just did vegan. I had to transition from my normal Filipino diet, better than standard American diet, to being conscious about everything being plant. And I tell you, I missed the sausages, and I missed the burgers, and I missed a couple other things initially in my brain when I was getting ready to switch over to plant-based. But it just so happens that these companies, Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger, were coming out with these meat-looking products. And the critique, because I remember posting a lot, and then I eventually switched over to even stop them, and I just pure plant-based, whole food plant-based, and cooking from scratch with the help of my wife. Now the critique was that whenever I posted anything on the use of my stuff, or when I would show people that this is my substitute for meat, when they questioned what am I eating for lunch, the critique was, oh, that's too much sodium. Didn't you read the article about this substitute stuff is so unhealthy for you because of the sodium, because of all the preservatives? And I will be truthful with you. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a lot. When you can't read, when it's all chemical, it makes you think, holy mackerel, am I taking all those chemicals in, and what's going to happen to my body? Well, what's going to happen to the body of these folks, the 38 or 36 people, was that they lowered the TMAO, they lowered their weight, and they lowered their LDL-C. That was statistically significant. The other things that were observationally impressive was the sodium that's in here is actually in the study groups, both the meat and the plant-based substitutes. The sodium was about the same because the folks that were allowed to have was burgers, chicken kind of looking things, and then ground beef. Both, that was the staple of the meat-based, and of the plant-based guys with Beyond Burger specifically. They only used one company. Beyond Burger does have their substitutes for burgers, and they're pretty good if you learn how to cook them properly. They have their substitutes for ground beef in plant-based form, mostly pea, and they have their substitutes in chicken-looking things, chicken nuggets or something like that, and sausages too. So what they found was the people that were using the meat-based products, they would salt their food. They would salt their ground beef and their other food options versus the salt that's not naturally, but added to these guys. So the sodium count was about the same. And the blood pressure didn't change between the two groups. So you would think the argument would be, oh, there's too much sodium and too much crap in this stuff, and it's going to raise your blood pressure. It didn't. And now again, it wasn't statistically significant, but there was not much difference. So that observation has to be commented on. And as you'll always hear, it does bring up the fact that, well, with this small study group, can we get more data to make it more impactful? And we probably can, but that involves housing people, that involves feeding them the same group, and that's always been the difficulty. To do anything where you control the variables of food, you have to somewhat keep them incarcerated or in a very controlled environment to have statistical significance and decrease all the variables. But the question would be, can that information, when you do a really strong analysis and keep everybody in a place and you feed them exactly what you want, can that be generalized to the population? And no, it can't, because your average person goes and shops like once to twice a week. It goes for sales like I do to save some money. And so we aren't as strict as what you'll find in the data that is presented or the methods presented for controlled studies. But again, it's important to just understand that in the study that was done by Chris Gartner called Swap Meat, it is fair to consider, with the first steps of switching over to plant-based, a plant-based meat substitute. And so it's been critiqued, and I believe there was a big article, some magazine, way back when, And it was interesting that it was funded by cattle industry, saying that plant-based meats are very unhealthy. And again, with my level of lifestyle change, I get people that don't have a big threat like an impending heart attack, or they're about to go on insulin. So those two things drives people to make an 180-degree change and switch from standard American diet to like all plant, low fat, and that they're motivated to maintain that for possibly the rest of their lives. My level in the average middle-aged or young or older patient is that they come to me with not really in danger, but they want to initiate change. And your average Joe or Jane that wants to initiate change will not be as motivated to sustain massive change over the course of the rest of their lives. So I always try to periodize the change, see how it worked, get some analysis, get some data to back up the change that was made, and or if it doesn't show that it's making any seat of the pants, I'm feeling better, I'm losing weight. If it's not there, then I'll see it in the data. And if nothing shows improvement, then I'll switch over to a different form of a lifestyle change. So it always is, again, the bottom line is that meat versus plant, I think you can exist in either world and have benefit to lifestyle, but you always have to have some form of exercise, have some form of proper sleep, restorative sleep, and some form of mindful practice in addition to the nutrition. And again, as I stated before, bottom line, whether you choose meat or plant-based or kind of gradations in between with fasting, it should be personally planned. And as far as how you choose that, it's very confusing. So you really should hire somebody who has a wealth of knowledge and wisdom and experience to shortcut your experiment. If it takes 8 weeks to see results on a chemical basis using blood, you might not notice much difference. As I mentioned, the 8 weeks of this study, called the swap meet, did show a difference in weight about 2 to 4 pounds, and your average person probably cannot hit or notice a 4-pound difference in 8 weeks. So what would be the drive to maintain that kind of practice? Well, you have to feel good. You should see results in waistline, maybe scale weight, and then it'd be nice to see data. That's how I judge a change and then modify the change. So whether I'm going from a plant-based patient going to meat or a meat-based patient going to plant, or somebody that's got a standard American diet that goes either way, it would be important to personalize it. It would be important to see data points beforehand. Hopefully the blood tests are covered by your insurance, but and if you're in high risk, I think it's important to get the big tests before you make a change, just to help you with motivation. Because whether you like it or not, when you make a 180-degree change in your nutrition plan, things are going to get in the way. There's going to be holidays of the winter and celebration, and being surrounded by donuts and highly processed grains and sugary stuff. Alcohol will be there. There's also going to be weddings and graduations of spring. There's also going to be summer concerts. So there's always going to be something that gets in the way. And then if you're a high school or college level athlete or patient athlete, like I refer to my patients, you're a prisoner to what your food sources come from or where they come from in your kitchen. If you don't cook, again, you're a prisoner to your knowledge base and what you have available in your budget and in as far as your stovetop. And if you don't know how to throttle your burner, if you don't know how to use a dry fryer, if you don't know how to use a deep fryer, I think all of them are very good elements of cooking and preparation that have been used across the world. If you don't know how to chop your vegetables fast, it'll be so painfully hard to break into that. And that's why I think it's a good shortcut to try plant-based. And again, the study showed 2 servings a day, 8 weeks time made a difference. TMAO, weight, and LDL-C. So those of you who are overweight might want to consider moving into a plant-based diet. Those of you who have high LDLs or elevated lipids, and your doctor's talking about statins, you might want to move into this type of a first step plant-based diet. And TMAO, no, doctors don't usually measure that, but that's just an aside to folks who are really looking at the details of inflammation, heart disease, plaque formation, all that other stuff. So it might be getting a little bit too deep, but I just wanted to prove that there are studies that the government actually funds, NIH actually funds, out of Stanford that are good quality, that have shown that if you're trying to break into a plant-based lifestyle, this is a nice first step. As far as using this totally, I don't think so. This gets to be expensive. I mean, this price was $5.60 on sale. So buying 4 sausages, which I love the Italian-based sausages, there's a lot of stuff in there. Overall, it can be expensive, but if you look at what the regular sausages cost, it's maybe $1 more, 50 cents more. Just have to be a good shopper. But more importantly, you have to be a healthy patient advocate for your own lifestyle change. And hopefully this gives you a couple of proven points that are studied, and maybe more studies will come out about after this. But if you have any questions, put them in the comment section down below. This is not meant to be a substitute for your medical care, so bring this information to your doctor. Maybe consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, because I do things like this all the time to get you healthy. Thanks for watching.